welcome to the second season of the Ecologies of Danger podcast. Ecologies of Danger is a project produced by the students of a course on environmental security at Colgate University. In this season, we look at the different ways in which the environment has become a security issue. In this episode, Matthew Glick looks at what Hurricane Harvey can tell us about environmental justice in the city of Houston.
Breaking news, Hurricane Harvey barreling into the Texas coastline as a Category 4 storm with 130-mile-an-hour winds.
Houston is a city in crisis, and now a city of islands. One of America's largest cities is crying out for help.
We all remember the news coverage, the videos of families stranded on their roofs, boats motoring down flooded freeways, homes destroyed. Hurricane Harvey ravaged the coast of Texas and killed over 100 people. The hurricane's estimated damages exceeded $150 billion. Houston, the fourth largest city in the U.S., was one of the areas most affected by Harvey's devastation.
The water was up to here. I walked out and I was just like screaming. I seen somebody, they tried to put us on air mattresses. It didn't work. They had to put the babies on air mattresses. People were carrying babies on their shoulders.
We need help. A whole bunch of families displaced, has lost everything.
As I heard these stories coming out of Houston, I immediately thought of my friend Christian, a Houston resident. Concerned, I reached out to see if he was okay. He said everything was fine. The storm hadn't done much, if any, damage where his house was. This was somewhat surprising to me. Considering what I was reading in the news and seeing on TV, there must have been some damage. But no. Did my friend just get lucky? Why did the storm devastate some Houston populations and not others? I was curious, so I did some research. The answer I found was deeply concerning. To understand it fully, we must first take a hard look at Houston's urban development.
Going back to Houston, Houston, Houston.
Houston city government has had, let's say, a hands-off approach to urban development. When it has intervened in urban development, it's usually been at the expense of the poor and marginalized. For instance, beginning in the 1920s, de facto zoning led to the city moving its landfills into well-established black neighborhoods. Literally, overnight, Houston turned black neighborhoods into trash sites. At the same time, the city was pumping money into private developments, driving the gentrification of minority neighborhoods. Some even go as far as to describe all this as a form of residential apartheid. Separate and unequal, poor and minority communities end up living in the areas that are low-lying and most vulnerable to storm surges and flooding. Now this all becomes more complicated when you remember that Houston is the oil capital of the U.S.
One day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea.
In the early 1900s, petroleum was first discovered in Texas. Quickly, the Gulf region became a major center of oil production and refinery. More discoveries near the greater Houston area soon turned the city into a major oil player. Oil companies swarmed in. To accommodate the industry, Houston built the ship channel, which brought in oil tankers, clinching its spot as an oil mecca. Now there are over 100 different companies operating in the area. A quarter of the country's oil refining happens here. As the center of this booming oil industry, Texas has fought hard to protect its economic interests. The state has repeatedly slashed regulations. The result? Lack of safety inspectors, relaxed regulations, and insufficient enforcement. This has been disastrous for the people of Houston. For instance, Manchester is a neighborhood in East Houston surrounded by petrochemical plants. Researchers have long found high levels of PAH in the homes of Manchester residents. The Union of Concerned Scientists, an environmental nonprofit group, determined that these residents are at least 24% more likely to develop cancer or respiratory illnesses than residents of wealthy neighborhoods in Houston. Would you want to live in Manchester knowing that statistic? Probably not. Unfortunately, most Houstonians living in communities like Manchester don't have a choice.
The best predictor of health and well-being in our society, and including Houston, is zip code. You tell me a zip code, I can tell you how healthy you are. And one of the best predictors of environmental vulnerability is zip code and race. And all communities are not created equal. You know, Houston's people of color community historically have borne the burden for environmental pollution and also the impact of flooding and other kinds of natural and man-made disasters.
That was Dr. Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, a professor at Texas Southern University. Bullard, himself a Houston native, argues that Houston's racist urban development has forced minority and low-income communities into at-risk areas, also known as fence-line communities. These vulnerable neighborhoods face even greater danger when a natural disaster hits, especially due to residents' inability to evacuate. Low-income residents often don't have cars and can't afford transportation, much less hotels. Add on potential language barriers or physical disability, and the disaster grows. You know what else is vulnerable? The petrochemical industry. When a disaster like Harvey hits, these factories spew out all kinds of toxins.
Now, there have been 2 explosions at a chemical works in Texas, which was badly flooded by Tropical Storm Harvey. The owner of the plant near Houston had warned that a loss of power meant volatile chemicals could overheat.
Residents of Houston's industrial communities already reporting unbearable chemical-like smells coming from the many plants nearby.
That contaminated water, a potential toxic soup containing oil, gasoline, or raw sewage.
So, we have low-income and minority communities in Houston that have been, due to racist urban planning, sectioned off into vulnerable locations. These locations are often surrounded by the polluting petrochemical facilities which increase cancer rates of nearby residents. The petrochemical industry is most responsible for climate change, which creates stronger and increasingly frequent hurricanes that further victimizes these fence-line communities. Harvey was one of these hurricanes. At the time of the hurricane, the extent of the petrochemical toxin release was hard to track. Understanding the true impact has been difficult. In Texas, regulations allow companies to self-report unpermitted releases of air pollutants. Yes, the very companies doing the polluting are the ones supposed to be doing the regulating, even when it is completely against their interest to do so. But thanks to the help of local reporters, research has shown that Harvey caused over 100 toxic releases. Who suffers the most from these releases? The low-income, minority, fence-line communities living right next to the petrochemical facilities.
It was black and disgusting, and slime was on top. I think it was slime. It looked like oil, something over-based on top of it. I didn't want my kids near it, and we were already in it. My kids all got staph infections. They all got sick. We all got sick.
Hurricane Harvey revealed Houston's deep inequalities. Sadly, these inequalities are not unique to Houston. Racist urban development policies exist throughout America. Vulnerable, low-income, and minority communities are often those most exposed to disasters. How do we protect these communities? For starters, we must combat climate change. With climate change increasing, storms like Harvey will continue to strike. To prevent this, we must shift away from oil and gas and look into greener energy. However, combating climate change is not the only solution. Hurricanes like Harvey only exacerbate the existing inequalities. To get at the root of the issue, we must find ways to ensure minority and low-income communities are safe. For Colgate University, I'm Matthew Glick.